Click this.
As a driven dentist, you see the world differently. Where some see scarcity, you see abundance. When others want to give up, you keep going. You're building an amazing life of significance. That means you can't rely on ordinary advice from ordinary advisors to get to your goals. You want advice that's going to help maximize your net worth so you can take even better care of the people you love, the causes you care about, and make your dent in the universe. But the fact is, this advice remains hidden because relatively few professionals are well versed in them, and the extremely affluent don't care to let you know about them. Join us as we pull back the curtain to reveal the often hidden advice and strategies used by today's most successful individuals and families. Welcome to Dental Wealth Nation. Here's your host, Tim McNeely.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Dental Wealth Nation Show. And on the Dental Wealth Nation Show, we spend a lot of time talking about money. We talk about how to grow your practice. We talk about what your number is and how much you need to accumulate to step away and have freedom. We talk about how do you take care of your employees. And today, I am so excited because we're going to address a big issue that I'm seeing in a lot of practices. And that's how do you not just attract the best talent, but how do you retain them? And how do you do so in a way that creates an abundance mentality? We talk about abundance all the time. We talk about the abundance mindset in our business or the abundance mindset when it comes to groups that we're in. But have you ever thought about applying abundance to how you compensate your employees? And that's why I'm so excited for today. We've got Kevin, and Kevin is the founder and CEO of Intuitive Compensation. And what I love about Kevin is he helps bring that abundance mindset to your practice and to your employees in a way like I've never seen done before. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tim.
Oh, I'm so excited. And, for those listening who haven't had a chance to get to know you yet, give us a little bit about your background and how you got started in doing what you do.
Sure. So for today, what I'd like to share with the listeners, Tim, is really the strategies, insights, and if we have time, even maybe the formulation of what our work has done between owners and key employees, and my work is in key employee retention packages. And so nothing more applicable than today's dentist and associate dentist conundrum, where what's in it for me is at the kind of crux of on everybody's mind. So kind of a quick background. When I was going to, my first job out of school was, believe it or not, trying to become a comedian. And I had some persistence in trying to get a job in comedy. And so the first job that I had, I landed on a pretty popular show. And I didn't know it at the time, but that show had one of the all-time greatest key employees, if you will, working for it. And the name of the company that I worked for was fictitiously called Dunder Mifflin, and the television show was NBC's The Office. And so thousands of applicants, and somehow my persistence had gotten me into that show as the production assistant and then assistant to the writers. So I spent a lot of time in the writer's room and on set of that television show. But what was instructive about that, Tim, was the compensation package that existed in Hollywood. And Steve Carell, who was arguably one of the more profitable shows, one of the kind of longest, most memorable comedies that had been on TV for some time, Steve had a contract that would last for 7 years, and he'd live true to that. And somebody at NBC had the foresight to find out what was important to Steve. Right? He had a young family. He didn't want to keep moving around. I believe he wanted his spouse to work. I wasn't in their private conversations, but he married an actress as well. And so they wanted to raise a family, and they were able to kind of tune in and give him a contract that aligned with everything he was looking for. And when they did that, Tim, what was interesting was nobody was talking about money, but the performance, everybody's best performance was allowed to come out of them. And we had one of the greatest cultures on the show. We had some of the best comedy, at least arguably. And, right as we were shooting season 1 of the NBC's The Office, all of a sudden, this movie came out that he shot, from a couple years earlier called 40-Year-Old Virgin, that just sent him to the stratosphere of earnings potential. So Steve could now make more money in a couple of months than he could in that 7-year contract. And what it kind of proves is that sometimes pay is not just about the money. Pay is far more emotional than we think. But dollar for dollar, your best use of money is not by rationalizing how much they can make if this happens or this production or these KPIs are met, but by turning your compensation from an expense into an investment, one that aligns with their ultimate KPIs, which is their goals, not company goals.
There is so much there that you just mentioned, and so much that can be unpacked. And so we could talk about all the wonderful jokes she wrote, but really, what
Yeah, well,
is there's a mindset shift there, isn't there, right? Turning payroll from a liability to actually to an investment. And I talk with a lot of doctors, a lot of organizations, and I don't hear a lot of that conversation. I do hear a lot about, right, creating fantastic culture for people, because you need culture to drive the workforce. But how do we start shifting this compensation piece from a liability to actually an investment?
Right. There's a lot of moving pieces to it that we're going to unpack today. What they did with Steve's contract essentially is what we call creating a big win. Right? Steve's big win aligned with exactly where he wanted to go. And there were a lot of metrics around it that we don't often know about because they don't fit on an Excel spreadsheet. Nobody's talking about them. Or we're just completely unaware because we can't rationalize it. And so, Tim, part of what we do has been the experience of doing this for more than a decade now, has been helping people bypass the rational in favor of the emotional. And don't worry, it doesn't mean that this is going to be fancy voodoo type stuff. There needs to be a real ROI coming back to the business, but oftentimes we're using the wrong timeframes, the wrong metrics, and the wrong mechanisms to get there.
So talk a little bit about the rational versus emotional side, right? When practices typically are approaching compensation, it's very rational, isn't it? Like you mentioned, it's the spreadsheets, and they're tying it to KPIs or this metric or that metric. So what does that shift start to look at, right? What does that even mean to move from rational to emotional?
Right. So first off, I think the kind of the big idea that we speak on in compensation is this. Most of us will think that once we settle for a base salary and then benefits, so kind of your baseline metrics, if you will, that we like to try to, and our brain naturally goes to incentivizing. And it's why? Because they're good ideas. Dentists have been told they're very smart. You're good at coming up with good ideas, and you should rationalize them. And so we put these good ideas on an Excel sheet and say, here, this is what could happen. And here's how you would benefit. And mathematically, here's how the company would benefit. The problem with good ideas is that they're relatively subjective. Good ideas are a dime a dozen, meaning a good idea could last for weeks, for months. And they're very easily, when circumstances favor our own instances, if you will, and they could be external, they're very easy to then complain about or find a new good idea. Hey, this service is down. We're not doing as many high-end services, but I've been doing more work and seeing more clients. The incentive for the high-end work needs to go away because what's coming in is regular work, or just more low profit, but I can't control that, right? There's a lot of circumstances that could happen. So the problem with this type of thinking is that it is in our conscious minds, which is a dangerous place to be, It is easily comparable to other dentists, to other industries, to other chairs, to other opportunities. And comparison is the enemy, particularly this deep in the information age. Switching gears. The big idea is that retention dollars can be far more powerful than incentive dollars. So switching gears, retention dollars or retention compensation is a completely different beast. Most of us don't have a good answer to what is your retention plan. Well, I pay them well. Well, the culture is good. Well, they can earn profit sharing. These are not good retention answers. My argument, Tim, to your listeners would be, why would you incentivize somebody who wasn't retained? So what is retention compensation? Retention compensation doesn't work in the IQ or the intelligence quotient of a person. It works in their emotional quotient. We are far more programmed to connect to emotions than we are information. A good emotion can last for years, where a good idea can last for days. So if you can attach to a good emotion, sky's the limit for what a person will go through, even if it's the disappointment of an incentive plan to hit a longer term, maybe potentially retention plan. Let me phrase this a different way. A lot of studies have been done on, if I'm categorizing this into retention dollars are more powerful than incentive dollars, I like to rephrase that as this: how you pay can be more impactful than what you pay. And what that means is, studies have been done that show that if I were to tell and again, I don't have the dentist numbers. So if a factory worker came in, and this has been done in critical thinking type positions and manual positions, but if I was working at a factory and I got $20 of base pay for the day, and I got a $10 bonus if we produced X amount of trinkets, that if you rephrased the same amount of money and you told me, hey, today we're going to pay you $30, but if you don't produce X amount of trinkets, we're going to penalize you $10 and you have to give us $10 back. Just by rephrasing it, it's called the loss aversion principles or studies or entitlement studies. Just by phrasing it, production went up 37%, meaning the pay was the same, but the persuasion was not. What these studies showed, Tim, is that when we try to influence somebody's behavior, it is seen as a control mechanism, and it is seen as an increase of responsibility. And people hate this. They hate a level of control over them, and they don't like increased responsibility. But when you positioned it as an entitlement, something they could lose, the body took a level of pride that was different and said, I'm not going to lose this. And it dug into a different level of motivation, and it worked harder. What's interesting here, Tim, is that if I went to your listeners and I wanted to kind of go through some of the data, and I've got some books on my shelf here, Good to Great by Jim Collins, The Founder's Dilemma, which was a Harvard study, Daniel Pink's Drive, Good to Great. All of these books would tell your listeners one truth, which was that incentives don't work. In fact, there is no data that suggests that over the long term that it will increase the quality of work that exists. There's not one long-term study that exists that shows it will do it. And all these books cite that. Jim Collins said, we found no link to executive compensation and the jump from good to great. As Daniel Pink cited, oftentimes it stifled good companies from making the jump to being great because they were trying to get their incentives. Incentives put blinders on. It went from what's in it for the patient, for the culture, for the team, to what's in it for me. And that type of person that was showing up didn't bring their best to the work and was constantly trying to compare because they've been trained to think about what's in it for me.
That is so wild, right? And no studies done showing that incentive compensation actually works, but most business runs on an incentive compensation program, don't they?
So then this is
This is crazy.
so right, like the 100% of the science is on my side, and it would be the institute that this Harvard's Founder's Dilemma was a book. That's a data book. I'm not even a data person. It was the study of 20,000 employees and 10,000 business owners over a decade, trying to find out what could we do with equity and profit sharing splits. The result, nothing. It played out for so few people that they wondered why so many smart people were doing the same thing. London School of Economics, MIT, Yale, you name it, they all came to the same conclusion. Daniel Pink has a top 10 TED Talk from 2000, early 2000s, that's still in the top 10 on this subject. It's an awesome, one of my favorite speeches.
Well, and actually, even with the data, as I was mentioning earlier, we just completed a study with Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, looking at the top challenges and concerns of entrepreneurs. Largest study ever done, 2,049 entrepreneurs, a collective $32 billion of net worth. And what's interesting is when we looked at the top business risk concerning entrepreneurs, right, the third largest concern, right, 16.9%. Of those entrepreneurs are so concerned about talent acquisition and retention, right? Because they know the people are the key, right? That's almost 1 in 5 entrepreneurs are saying one of my biggest challenges that I face in my organization is actually acquiring and retaining key employees. But yet we know from the data, they're all going about it using this incentive model.
And that's the hard part, Tim, like your network. We tend to work with business owners who care about their leadership, who are probably in the top percentile of great leadership. But it goes to the saying, Tim, unfortunately, most people are capable of implementing, that you're working with or in your network, are capable of implementing any idea in their business better than others, even a bad idea. And that's what happens is our own ego tells us, well, those aren't my circumstances, right? This is the same logic that 50% of America's financial retirement plan is winning the lottery. It makes no sense whatsoever, but yet it's the number one spent money on plan.
Yeah.
And it just makes no sense. But it happens.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a real problem. I hear it across the dental service organizations that I work with. They're concerned about, right, how do I retain this great talent that we've brought on, right? They're spending a ton of money on acquisitions. They're growing these companies, but yet they're worried about the associate doctors leaving, right? So these are very real concerns and very real problems that the industry is facing. Major pain point for a lot of people. And once again, I find that so interesting. Because I hear all the time about, incentives. I don't hear anyone talking the language that you're talking about, which is retention.
Right. And it's, if we take another step here too, dentists are in a interesting position because of the amount of money that they earn as well. So psychologically speaking, when we take a look at studies that are done on the emotional well-being of pain, what we find is that if we are under, call it $100,000 today, which would be about adjusted for inflation since Princeton put on the study, what you'd find is that below this amount, each additional dollar of pay has a tremendous impact on a person's life. So below 100,000, this person's happiness levels go up, their sadness levels decrease, and their anxiety decreases. And each dollar of pay underneath that level just carries about $10 worth of value, which is why sometimes you'll see a good employee in that range leave for $2 or $3 more, an hour, even though it will cost them more in the gas to drive out there and back. It still feels a lot better for that person. The problem is that once you get above that, which most associate dentists, if we're talking about here, is that each additional dollar of pay, all of the emotional benefits you get from more pay plateau, except for one emotion. And that's the person's ego or their status. They called it the ladder, and where they perceive themselves. So the problem in this area is not only does a dollar get soaked up more by the government, so about 40% goes to the government as we increase our salaries to associate dentists, but 40 cents goes to the ego. And in the professional services world, of which dentistry is a part of, and I would argue is one of the bigger egotistical places, not the associate dentist necessarily, but there is no shortage of bankers trying to give them money to loan to start their own business. The math is often delusional, meaning how many dentists think that, oh, well, if I started my own and we did 800,000 of revenue my first year, I'd be making $800,000. It's like with no consideration that they'll be working from 5 to 9 every night, trying to keep up all the expenses that it takes to run it, etc. So, it's a hard. It's if you are going to pay people more money above that level, you should fight tooth and nail to do everything you can to not put that dollar into their pocket. You should try to find a mechanism to put it into a delayed gratification vehicle in exchange for staying. The problem with that is you have to make it well worth it, because delayed gratification is often an unwelcomed guest.
Yeah. Well, and this once again is so true. I see this on the retirement planning side and through traditional 401ks and profit shares, and they have their place, but they can only go so far. And oftentimes, just getting plan participants to participate and save for their future, it's a challenge, because you've got to teach people to look forward, right? That delayed gratification. So how do we start getting around this? How do we build that emotional tie and get people actually excited about doing this and excited at staying at a great organization?
Sure. So the first thing you have to do is you have to figure out how to make it worthwhile. So let me give some examples that I've heard of from the dental industry, and these would be maybe common ones, right? So the first thing that a lot of people do to try to create a big win, which the metrics we use for a big win are going to be around the time frame of 5 to 10 years. Anything below that, the mind is going to treat it like an incentive, like a bonus, and you're going to have a lot of comparison issues, particularly if you are bringing on other associate dentists who are going to say, well, he got this much money, So 5 to 10, anything longer than 10 years, really the mind can't, no 24-year-old is even thinking about 40, let alone 659 and a half or 65. Mm-hmm. So you want to try to land it in a zone that's going to be a worthwhile value exchange for both the dentist and the employee. So I have seen in, let's call it roll-up exits, right? We're acquiring new dentists. They can participate. Like here we are today, we're going to be acquired, and then we're going to exit in another 5 years into a roll-up, and you would participate, and they create a value that would be somewhere between 100 and 300,000, which sounds like a lot of money. The problem for a dentist is that's 1 year, and it wouldn't qualify for the ego to stay for 1 year when the comparables are going to be, well, I could start my own and make 400,000. Why would I wait here for 4 years when I can do that? So the first challenge is, how can we get that number to be much more impactful? How can we get it to look bigger? The secret to pulling this off is to get it as big as possible for pennies on the dollar. And the first thing you have to start with is the owner's math. Is if you're going to create a big win for them, what's in it for them? And so part of finding abundance, first thing you have to do is you have to convince the dentist office that it's going to be worth it for them. Otherwise, it's just an expense, and it's just money leaving their pocket and going into someone else's. So, Tim, give me some bookends here, and we can use an example. Let's just say of a small dentist practice. If I'm a dentist, would it be safe to say that $1 million in revenue would be maybe an average size?
Yeah, out there, yeah, $1.5 million. That's a typical practice.
Let me use $1 million so I can do the math easier. And then if I added an associate,
And actually even 2 million for the associate level. And a lot of our doctors are closer to that level.
Okay. So let's use two. Let's say that I'm running and I can, if I'm a solo dentist, 1.5 is good. But if I add an associate dentist, what would happen to my practice revenue? What would happen to my scale, economies of scale, if you will? How much could I earn? Would I just be going from 1.5 million to 3 million, or could I potentially do even more now that we have two of us?
No, you could get more, and the place where it really kind of starts throwing off some of the owner income is when you get to about 3 associates or so.
Okay.
But yeah, adding another associate certainly helps you start growing. But you've got to pay that associate for the work that they're doing, because
Right.
you literally are bringing in someone, and you got to put them on the payroll to do that. So you have to compensate that associate. But yeah, you can start growing your revenues pretty substantially.
All right. So humor me here and just kind of give me a ballpark.
You know what? You could go from $1.5 million to 2.5 by adding an associate.
Okay. So if I'm a soloist, what's my profit on 1.5 million? What would be an average profit?
Oh, now we're in CPA world, but
Yeah.
what are the benchmarks? Let's get a good benchmark here.
Perfect. And thank you for bringing that up. This will help.
Yeah.
I was going to say 400 would be my guess.
30 to 40%. High efficiency practices, you're getting it 50%. So yeah, let's do 40%.
Okay, so if I'm doing 1.5, I'm somewhere around 500,000 profit. Now,
Mhm.
let's say that I added 3 associates. So now I've got me and 3 associates at my place. So I'm going from maybe 500,000 profit per year. If I've got 3 associates that I'm humming along, and you're
Mhm.
thinking of somebody who's doing it well, Tim, how much profit are they making overall?
Oh, at the 3, you're probably up to now $1 million profit, $1.5 million profit.
So 1.5. So if I have these extra, and remember, time is the most valuable asset. If I have these extra 3 and they stay with me, knowing that it's like if one leaves, it's a heck of a lot of work to recruit somebody, bring them in, train them up to a place where you can trust them, whether in your systems, in your culture, etc. You may have to try for 6 to 8 months with somebody and then start over again because they weren't the right culture fit. This is a lot of time, energy, and profits wasted.
Yeah.
So the owner's math would start by saying, if these people stayed for an extra 10 years, I'm going to be super generous here so I can do the math easy. If they stayed for an extra 10 years, that's an extra $10 million of profit.
Yeah.
So the first thing we do for the owner is go into the future to find the biggest number, because that's the number that they're going to care about. It is then easier to get them to commit to a bigger amount of money if they stay. So if I have turnover, and do you have any turnover statistics on associate dentists, Tim?
Oh, that's a great question. What is let me pull it up. Yeah, average turnover is about 30% plan to apply for a new job in the next 12 months. So 1 out of 3. That's
So
huge.
every 3 years, I'm pretty much having staff turnover. That's basically costing me time, energy, and money to go up. So the argument then becomes, and here's how you might be able to find abundance, if you will, is if you didn't retain people and you lost the staff every 3 years, you had to start over. And let's just say that it took you, a year of lost profit because of the new expenses of bringing them on, the time it takes to train them, the energy. You're looking at $3 million of lost time over a 10-year period. And that's with a lot of headaches and a lot of, execution on going backwards instead of forwards in your practice. So so you then can create this delta to say, hey, look, if we could use if we wound up at $9 million of profit, remember, you're risking with turnover, maybe only winding up with 7. But if we used $1 million to put together, like, let's just say to create a big win for people, would you be able to, would you be okay if you wound up at 9 million instead of 10 million, but your people won too?
Yes, right. Who says no to that?
Right. And so if you just think about that scenario, that would be an extra, 33,000 per associate dentist per year in that example. And everybody's got their own math, but hopefully that gives you some semblance of structure to think through your own numbers as you're listening to this.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is how much money's on the line. How much money, and again, you have to solve for the owner first. You have to find their abundance. And then you have to kind of point out the delta and use it. You study a lot of family offices. I've heard you mention, like, I'm very envious of your passion to study what the ultra wealthy are doing and to try to bring that to your client base. What I found in that space was people didn't want to be shown. They didn't want to go through huge planning processes. They didn't want to go through what they wanted was somebody that knew them, that brought them ideas, particularly if they showed them how to take money from their left pocket, move it to the right pocket, and get more out of it.
Yep.
And so if you can put together a retention package that lives on your company books, where if they leave, you can just repurpose it to the next dentist, how many people wouldn't be more abundant? And the saying goes like this: how many of you would pay your key people more if you knew that if they left, you could get some or all of it back?
Yeah, right. That's brilliant, right? Talk about a reason and a rationale. Right now, you're creating retention plans. You're not just incentivizing them to stay, but they've got a reason to stay, and it's helping the owner out. And these are very, very powerful strategies that can be used.
And so what's nice about this, Tim, is if you think about it, you mentioned what everybody's pushing the chips all in on these days, which is we have a great culture, right? What's lacking, though, is the 1-2 punch. If you have a great culture and you have a great big win to be able to communicate to your people, you've got the 1-2 punch of people staying.
Yeah.
Without money, eventually the conversation, if you don't have a big win in place with your people, or you don't have some type of something they could lose if they leave, it's just comparison, and you're training them to just say yes to somebody that's going to pay them more money.
Yeah,
because that's how they're trained to think.
Yeah, and what you bring up, Kevin, is so important, right? Culture, it absolutely matters. You can have the best compensation plan in the world and the best benefits, and if your culture isn't there, people are going to leave because they're going to be legitimately unhappy. But if you have great culture and you don't have the right retention plans, people are still going to leave, right? I love that idea of the 1-2 punch, right? You've got to hook them on the culture, and you got to pull the money piece in there too. They both have to be working together as a cohesive system to really continue to attract and retain the best people out there.
A players want you to create and have this figured out for them. They want to come in to know that they're going to have a big win and that you've already thought this out through them, and that it helps promote them showing up as themselves as their happiest, best performing self. That can contribute to a we culture, not a me culture.
Yeah. Well, right, and these are plans that can be used to also attract and recruit some of the best in class employees, also, can't they?
Yep. And A players want greatness on the pay and the culture side.
Yeah. Well, I think you're so right. Right. It's up to the organizations to figure this stuff out, because that's what A players expect, right? You come in and you're like, what do you have? Right. They don't want to invent it on the fly. They want to know it's already there. Yeah. And they want to know you've thought through it and you've got a plan for them to really take care of them. So very, very powerful. So Kevin, on another piece, right? A lot of the doctors out there, and rightfully so, right? They're building great organizations. And one of the things that really matters to them is EBITDA, right? It's their earnings. It's how much revenue, right? What's that number coming in? So how does this affect EBITDA, right? If you're paying people more, what are we doing to that magic EBITDA number here?
Yeah. So if you're looking at EBITDA, when it becomes most important is when you're looking at exiting, right? And so every dollar counts. So if I'm in the Carolinas, and in 2017 we pulled the data from Deal Stat or Deal Source, whichever they had changed their name that year, and I never remember which one too. But they are an insight into transactions that happen in businesses. And we pulled 1,187 transactions. And what was interesting, Tim, was that out of those, only 48 of them had a real good like retention type program. But what was instructive is that those businesses across all industries, those businesses that had a good answer to what's in place to keep your key people, went in the 90th, 44 of them went in the 90th or greater percentile of multiple offer. So if you are playing an EBITDA game or you want to try to get your multiple up, there's no greater question that you could have a good answer for, particularly in professional services, than what's in place to keep your key people. Tim, people want to buy an ATM machine, not a job.
Well said. Right. And that's the thing, right? When, as a certified exit planner, this is what we're always assessing on the business is we're looking at, the transferability of the business and also, right, how attractive is the business? And I love that analogy, right? They want to buy an ATM machine, not a job, right? When you're getting acquired, right, people want to buy a business that is run well by good people. And you got to keep those people around, especially through the transaction.
Yeah. And a lot of people are, especially these day and age, are going to have some type of performance on the back end tied into it. And so if you have an office and 2 out of the 3 people leave, what do you think that's going to do to your ongoing performance-based pay if that's in your transaction agreement?
Well, that's interesting, and that comes back to the very first bits that we were talking about. Is right the back end pay, right? Those second bites at the apple, so to speak. They're incentive based, right? They're based on you hitting certain things, which once again, based on all the studies, they don't work, do they?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. People like winning. Winning is actually a more attractive kind of retention tool than pay is. Oftentimes we think it's the pay, we think it's the incentive doing the work, but it's the culture and the winning that is usually the main driver. And you know that because as soon as things turn the other way, it's abandoned ship.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, wait, what happened? The pay was the same, the incentive was the same. Why'd you leave? Oh, we weren't winning anymore.
No. So now you have worked with quite a few dental practices. You've written a great book on this called Buckets, where you really look at these strategies. So what do you see across the organizations where you've worked with, where you've really helped them focus on retention plans? What are some of the great results that you're seeing across these organizations?
Yeah. So in a couple of things that is unique to the dental practice. The first one is going to be, we call it the ideal zone. If you were running any other business, then you would typically find a window where retention would be probably between this standard deviation curve of like 2 to 5 years would be the single greatest time to implement the power of delayed gratification. Dentists, we don't get such luxury. That, for whatever reason it is, retention needs to happen usually between years 1 and 2. By the time they get to 2, the switch happens in employees that happens in other industries at year 5, which is the mindset shifts from, I'm at this great place and it was the business owner who I have to thank for all of this. And after year 5 in normal industries, then the shift starts to go to, look what I'm doing, and I'm helped do this for the company. And my work is kind of repetitive now. And, it goes from a hey, I'm grateful for what the owner did to, hey, look at the role I played in this. That happens much quicker in the dental profession. So it's really, shifted to where a dentist has to make quicker decisions than others. Don't get me wrong; it's still appreciated, still works at any age. It might just cost you a little bit more, but it happens fast in the dentist world. So that's one thing to kind of be aware of. And Tim, I went off on a tangent on that element. I don't know if I answered the question that you asked there.
Yeah, I was just asking, what are some of the examples that you see in the dental practices that you've worked with, and what have been some of the great results that you've gotten?
So young associate, first-time associate dentist, a lot of times student debt packages are a real cool way to incentivize somebody to come in, to stay with your organization, etc.
Wait, student debt packages. What do you mean on that? Like you can use these to help the doctors out with their student loans?
Yeah, you can. So you can calculate you can calculate exactly how much debt they have versus how much they would have to make versus the taxes that they would have to pay on that money to get rid of it. And you can then start pulling the levers of how it can be most efficient. You can give there's 4 types of key employees. If it's an entrepreneurial type and key employee, you want your incentives to be, let's make this happen faster. If it's a integrator key employee or what we call a tenure-based employee, then they don't mind if it happens longer, but they want it to be safer and more stable. They don't want disappointments along the way. So it depends on the person's individual personality. It also depends on their goals. Tim, a lot of the dentists we're seeing are in this period where they've got this runway. They don't know exactly what their exit looks like. Because they don't know what it looks like, planning for it's hard. I think I heard on one of your podcasts that only 19% of dentists have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing is for that dentist that doesn't quite know how it all plays out, it doesn't want to go through an elaborate planning process when they aren't ready to, what I call, commit to the future. It is far easier to position for the future than it is to commit to the future. And so where we're seeing a lot of success is, hey, I am a 34-year-old dentist. I'm working for a 55-year-old dentist. Do I have a shot at getting this? Is he going to sell it? And I'm going to be pissed that I stayed here for 5 years and then he sold it to somebody else and I hate that person. So these types of programs allow, where we're just kind of seeing the most volume is quite the saying, it's easier to position for the future than it is to commit to it. And what we're doing is we're putting in big wins regardless of what the business owner does, so that the key player, the associate dentist, doesn't have to have the worries that often drive them away, which is, I'm just going to be working here and he has no plan in place. He's just going to own it till he's 85 and I'm going to be a sucker. I got to leave now.
Yeah.
Because there's no plan.
Yeah. Which you often see, right? You see the associate dentist working in there and the owner dentist just can't make a choice of who they want to sell it to. They don't have that exit plan. And actually the stat is even a little worse than 16%. It's 96% of dentists are unable to maintain their financial lifestyle in retirement. That's straight from the ADA. So it's just absolutely shocking. But right, you have that associate doctor in there working, unsure of what the future looks like. And then that owner doctor, they lose great people time and time and time again because they can't retain them. But Brett, I love that idea though, of just going back to the student loan piece, because oftentimes you lose great people to the state or to some loan repayment program because they're able to offer that. And you're thinking, well, as an owner, there's no way possible that I could do that.
Yeah. And again, every practice is going to be different, but there is a means to measure ROI on that person staying with you. And in exchange, they would deliver this much to you. Would you be okay siphoning off this much for them? Yeah. And here's how you would budget for it. Right. Yep. Elon Musk used this strategy with Tesla. It was so abundant. The courts are like shooting it down now. But he negotiated a $56 billion package when the company was only worth $47 billion.
Wow.
right? He negotiated a package for himself that they basically agreed to pay him more than the entire company was worth, let alone any cash flow or anything else.
Hmm.
He created over, it seemed big at the time, but what he did was he found the mechanisms to find the abundance and to get people to commit to it so that he could go out and deliver, was it like $1.4 trillion of value.
Yeah.
56 billion seems so little compared to the value that he added. And I think dentists and people should be applying these strategies and these types of tactics to their compensation plan. Because guess what? Outside of the one lawyer that was represented 9 shares that wound up blocking the package, every single person who owns Tesla stock is like, that was a great deal. We do it over and over again.
Wow, so powerful. And right, we could literally talk for hours on this, right? And I think your point about, right, every practice is unique, right? You really have to run the numbers because owners have different goals. Your key employees have different goals. So these are really personalized for the enterprise. These are not, cookie cutter type things. These are customized, bespoke solutions for your practice and for your people. And so it's important to remember that. And that's why just running the numbers and seeing what this looks like for your organization, I think, is so important. And right, once again, let's talk a little bit about your book that you wrote on this, because right, these really do require some understanding and a little bit of education to wrap your head around them. So tell us a little bit about buckets, Kevin.
Sure. So, my business winds up running in what I'll call complex, meaning the mechanisms that exist. If I go to the medium and the larger companies, the mechanisms that exist allow those businesses to place 64% of the overall pay into retention dollars. But the mechanisms that they're using, public traded equity, et cetera, don't exist for small business owners. And so the problem with it is that they created about 17 strategies in what I call discriminatory compensation land. And these are tax, legal, Department of Labor, IRS tax codes that you can navigate. And the positive is they do exist. The negative is they're so complex, it's hard to break through to understand these things. And so I realized very early on that if I didn't have a book that helped people walk through and compare them with some case study examples and everything else, that it would be very hard for people to absorb these. And so we created and I wrote the book that kind of outlined all of a business owner's options when it comes to pay, the positives and negatives to each. Even there's negatives to even the 2 pillars we work in. But it allows them to craft a strategy that can work for their culture, and it allows them to understand the 5th and 6th pillar a little bit better than I think what we traditionally try to think of, which is equity, SARs, or profit sharing type arrangements.
And I just put a link if you want to grab the Buckets book down below. It's bucketsbook.com. So I would encourage you to grab a copy. And Kevin, how do we get a hold of you to learn more and to run some of these illustrations so that we can see the power of building retention over incentive plans for our businesses?
Yeah, best resource is probably just our website, which is intuitivecompensation.com, intuitivecompensation.com. And that would be a good place for people to go where they can learn more about the resources that we have for them, the assessments we have. So if they were thinking about an associate dentist on this call, we got a 1-question assessment for people there that can say, hey, my person sounds most like this one, and give you some ideas just on the tactics, some of the tactics that we use and what they value. And this is just from our experience and of negotiating an average of a 13.2 year signed and agreed to retention earnout contract between owners and key players. And, and then the most important part of that statement, Tim, is every dollar that goes into that because of owners math comes back to the business in multiples.
Incredible, right? These are so powerful. I want to see more of these used because they really do. They solve such a fundamental problem that we are seeing in dental right now is how do you retain the best in class talent, right? How do you grow your enterprise value? And how do you blend your culture with the compensation piece? And I love what you're doing because you do. You take all these complex things and you're able to distill them down and help us work on those mindset shifts to see things just a little bit differently and realize what can be possible for our organizations. So any closing thoughts? I mean, like I said, we could go for hours on this, but and I feel like we just barely scratched the surface on how powerful these strategies are. But any closing thoughts before we sign off here, Kevin?
My slogan's always compensate great before it's too late. And you had something that stuck in my mind that is a quote I loved from you, which says, later is often too late. It usually then gets harder, more costly, and more risky. Yeah. And I would say no truer words, Tim.
Yeah, right. Everything's okay until it's not. So, right, get ahead of these things, right? You have the opportunity now and take advantage of it. So, Kevin, thank you for being such a great guest. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and really helping dental entrepreneurs retain their best employees and just create that culture of abundance in their practice and outside. So thank you again for sharing so generously with us.
Tim, big fan. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you again here soon on the Dental Wealth Nation show.
You've been listening to Dental Wealth Nation. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Join us next time as we pull back the curtain to reveal the often hidden advice and strategies used by today's most successful individuals and families, and help maximize your net worth so you can take even better care of the people you love. Till next time, make sure to hit the website at dentalwealthnation.com.